welcome to Money and You, an initiative of the Financial Services Council that aims to grow your financial confidence and well-being. Our research into KiwiSaver has found that there's a significant number of us who don't actually know what we're contributing to our KiwiSaver and who don't actually feel very prepared for retirement. Today, we've got two KiwiSaver experts with us, Daniel Lark and Farrell, who are here to answer some commonly asked KiwiSaver questions. So we're going to look at fees, contributions, withdrawals, and a bunch of other things. Welcome, Daniel and Corey, and thank you for taking the time to clear up some KiwiSaver questions for us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's get stuck in. So there have been some changes, or there are going to be some changes to default KiwiSaver providers this year. And I'm just wondering if you could explain what the difference is between a default KiwiSaver provider and a non-default provider, or what you guys like to call an active choice.
So a default provider is just a KiwiSaver provider that has a contract with the government. And it means that if you're automatically enrolled when you start a new job, that you will be allocated to one of the default providers. An active choice is more where you have opted into KiwiSaver, or if you've been automatically enrolled and have decided to change what fund you're in, that you make an active choice to be at a different provider.
And what is it that's actually changing on the 1st of December?
So firstly, the providers that actually are contracted to offer a default scheme, they're changing. So there have been more of a focus on lowering of the fees that are charged. There's also been a change to the default fund choice, in that members who were automatically enrolled were allocated to a conservative investment. That's now changing to balanced. And so with the default changeover that's happening in December, we're going to see a number of KiwiSaver members moved from conservative funds into balanced funds, as well as switching between providers from those KiwiSaver providers that are no longer default providers.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Corey. And Daniel, I'm just wondering if say I was in one of the default funds currently, but that's going to change from the 1st of December, do I need to do anything, or is it all just sorted for me?
Yeah, good question, Russ. Essentially, that's up to you. You should have heard from your current default provider asking you to essentially make a choice between staying with them, or they will also note that if you don't do anything, you'll be reallocated to another provider. This is particularly pertinent to the new default providers as of the 1st of December. So you may well move to another provider if you decide to not do anything. And I guess situations could potentially come up where you might have husband and wife in the same fund and scheme, and they may well, if they decide to not make a choice, get split into two different providers.
So we'll move on to fees, because I know this is quite a pertinent topic for many people. What are the different types of fees when it comes to KiwiSaver, and how do they work?
So generally speaking, there are two different types of fees. There is a percentage-based fee, which comes out of your KiwiSaver every business day. And then there's a admin fee, which is normally every month, and that's a dollar-based fee. KiwiSaver providers are slowly phasing these out, and there has been some pressure on those. But those are generally the two different types of fees. Some providers have different ways of charging. Some charge a fixed dollar fee as well. But overall, those are the two two main ways to get charged.
And how important are fees to consider in the long run?
Good question. I think it should be noted that while fees are important and they can impact on your overall balance in the long run, returns after fees are also something that should be considered. If there is a provider that is delivering great returns but might charge a little more in comparison to a cheaper provider, people would have to weigh up that, keeping in mind that past returns aren't indicative of future returns, of course.
Yeah. So I guess fees are probably one factor of many factors that you should consider when you're looking at your KiwiSaver.
Definitely, yeah. Generally speaking, you can look at the service a KiwiSaver provider offers. Fees and performance seem to be the three main factors to consider. And it should be noted in relation to your prior question around the default providers and that change. The new providers, there have been a significant focus on downscaling of the fees, so they are cheaper.
Corey, might go back to you. Contributions. Could you explain what the different types of contributions are and the differences between them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're a KiwiSaver member, if you're in paid employment, such as a salary or wage, you have a requirement to contribute a minimum of 3% of your salary or wage into KiwiSaver. Now, IRD made some changes over the last couple of years, and they sort of widened the range of the contributions that you can make through your salary. So you can choose anywhere from sort of 3, 4, 6, 8, even 10%. You can direct sort of all those sort of ranges into your KiwiSaver if you so choose. A lot of people will just do sort of the 3%, and that's because the employer will make contributions of 3% into a KiwiSaver member's account as well. The other sort of contribution that KiwiSaver members make is those on a voluntary basis. So if you're a self-employed person, because you are your own employer, you can choose to make voluntary contributions into your account in order to get that annual government top-up, which is $521.43. So generally speaking, if you are making 3% contributions and earning slightly over, it's 3% on a salary or wage annually of about $35,000. You'll contribute at least $1,050 over the course of a calendar year, which means that you should maximise that government contribution each year.
Love a bit of free money.
Yes, and it's really unfortunate that so many KiwiSaver members aren't contributing, and that there's all that government contribution that's sitting on the table for members if they make that choice to contribute. And
if say you are contributing the minimum, or perhaps you don't know how much you're contributing, because we know a lot of people have no idea, and you want to check that and perhaps increase it, is that easy to do, or is there a lengthy process to go through?
Well, the rate that's automatically applied if you haven't chosen sort of goes to 3%, so you'll automatically be contributing that at least. But if you do want to check what you are currently contributing, if you have made a change in the past or if you're just not sure, a quick word with your employer or HR or the payroll team, they should be able to tell you no problem. If you did need to change your contribution rate, currently it's as simple as ticking a couple of boxes on a form, putting your name and details down and giving that to your employer. And generally speaking, changes will be put in place in time for your next pay.
Awesome. All right. So obviously we know KiwiSaver is, you can't really touch it until retirement, unless, of course, you're using it for the first home. And there are perhaps a couple of other things, reasons that you can withdraw the funds earlier. And we might touch on that a bit later. But one of the questions that commonly gets asked is KiwiSaver, is it your money or is it the government's money? I don't know if you can shed some light on that question.
Yeah, I'll take this one, and it is a very common question that we get. Essentially, KiwiSaver, when yourself and if your employer is also contributing, is sent to the IRD and then sent on to the provider. The provider invests that, but it's sent to a trustee who holds the money in trust. That's something that the government can't get at, and the provider can't get at either. So that's security there. One of the questions that we often get is what happens when I die? Will the government get those funds? But KiwiSaver is considered part of your estate as well. So in short, KiwiSaver is your money.
I'd also point out that while, if you're a default enrolment and you've been allocated to a particular provider, you still have the choice and sort of control to choose what investment manager is operating your KiwiSaver. You can choose what sort of investment fund that you go into if you want to invest ethically. There are lots of different options, and if you're not happy with how your money is currently being managed, then you do have the option to move wherever you like.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for clearing that up. Now, another question I've got is if you haven't checked your KiwiSaver in a while, or you're one of those people that maybe, you've got it, but you haven't looked at it since you started working. First of all, is it worth checking your KiwiSaver? Like how often should you check your settings and where your money's invested, and what sort of things should you be checking?
If you have no idea where it is, you can check who your current provider is by logging into the IRD's online services called My IR. In there, you'll be able to see who's managing your current KiwiSaver. From there, you'll be able to check in with your provider. They can give you an update on balance, or you'll be able to log in online and see how things are tracking. What should you be checking? I'd say that if you're just looking at it, say, for the first time in a long time, you'll be wanting to examine your fund choice. You'll want to make sure that that is in line with your risk profile. So making sure that you're not taking on too much risk for someone like you. And there are lots of tools to check what sort of fund might be suitable for someone with a particular set of circumstances.
Can I just ask, Corey, in terms of the different types of funds, what are the different types of funds and how risky are each of them?
Yeah, so if you were going on a scale of, say, 1 to 5, 1 being least risky and 5 being, say, the most risky, way down at the bottom, you've got the likes of a cash fund. From there, you'd move to defensive, which has a wee bit more growth asset exposure, conservative, then into balanced, growth, aggressive, and then if you're really wanting to take a particular tilt, there's all sorts of single asset class funds, depending on the KiwiSaver provider that you're with. So if you wanted to, say, look at emerging markets or invest 100% in global equities, there's options to suit everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that the type of fund that you choose to invest in could change over time, or, depending on how old you are, what sort of life stage you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So we find with, say, younger members or those coming into their 20s and 30s, there might have been growth when they first enrolled. As the life stage changes, they might be positioning to buy a first home. If they're wanting their money out in a shorter period of time, like I plan on buying a home in the next 2 to 3 years, they might say that I don't necessarily want to take on as much risk as a growth fund, and they might look to reduce their risk a wee bit, moving into a, say, conservative or defensive fund as their withdrawal draws a bit nearer. But I would say a good opportunity to look at your KiwiSaver is any sort of major life change. If you've had a kid, if you've bought your first home, if you're nearing retirement, they're all good opportunities to examine where you're invested and how you're investing.
Awesome. Daniel, did you have anything to add to that in terms of what other things you should check if you haven't checked your KiwiSaver in a while?
Yeah, I think if it were me, I would also look to make sure the majority of KiwiSaver providers have an online portal. So I'd look to check and see that contributions are flowing through okay from your employer. So just check your payslip and then check the transaction history there, just to make sure that they all match up.
All right. Withdrawals. I'm quite keen to chat about this. So you could obviously access your KiwiSaver. It's designed for retirement, but you can also access it, in instances of financial hardship. And, you mentioned taking it out for your first home. I don't know if there's anything else. But yeah, I wanted to touch on a few of these. So let's start with actually accessing the money for retirement. How do you actually get access to your money when you finally need it? What's the process?
Yeah, so once you reach the retirement or withdrawal eligibility age, contact your KiwiSaver provider. They will have a form that you'll need to complete. So generally they're online, but your provider will be able to send you that form. They will generally ask for a statutory declaration to be completed as well in front of, for example, a Justice of the Peace or a solicitor. And the reason for that is essentially you're declaring whether or not you're out of the country for a particular period because you may have been overpaid government contributions. Once you've got that statutory declaration completed and supplied the provider with the form, as well as generally they ask for evidence of your bank account, like a bank statement, just to make sure that it's going to the right place. Send that in and that will be processed. And we do say to allow 10 business days for that withdrawal to take place. There are many different ways to access your money. You don't always have to, the moment you turn 65, for example, take it all out. You can take out regular withdrawals to supplement your pension or just one-off lump sums as you see fit.
I'll just say that there's no compulsion. You're not actually required to make withdrawals. So if you're, say, continuing working, you're still able to make contributions, and you're not actually required to close down your KiwiSaver account if you want to keep it essentially as just another form of savings that's not locked in, then that option also exists.
Mm-hmm. All right. In terms of accessing that money in other circumstances, withdrawing it for a first home is obviously possible now, and we know that more and more Kiwis are taking advantage of that to get onto the property ladder. So how does it work if you're a first home buyer looking to use a chunk of your KiwiSaver towards that deposit? Is it a similar process to if you're taking it out for retirement, or is it totally different?
Yeah, quite similar. So again, form, supporting evidence. The legislation requires that you provide certain other bits and pieces like a sale and purchase agreement, generally in the name of the person that's making the withdrawal. and your solicitor or the person doing your conveyancing will also have to supply a couple of bits of evidence. So once that's all together, get it into your provider, and again, we say allow up to 10 business days, just because there's quite a bit of documentation, and that gives us plenty of time to get it out to the solicitor's trust account in time for settlement. I would also just highlight that in order to be eligible for a first home withdrawal, people do have to have been in KiwiSaver for a minimum of 3 years. And there are certain amounts that can't be accessed, there's a minimum balance of $1,000 has to stay in your KiwiSaver. And you also cannot access Australian superannuation funds if you have actually moved between Australia and New Zealand and brought your super with you.
Financial hardship withdrawals. Corey, do you want to explain a bit about how this works? You know, what can be withdrawn and what can't, the process. How does it all work?
Absolutely. So with respect to KiwiSaver, obviously it's locked in unless you meet specific circumstances, first home, retirement, so if you've left the country. And there is a carve-out that allows for, if you're in significant financial hardship, to access some of the money that either yourself or your employer have put in. You cannot access money that, say, the government's put in, whether or not that was the $1,000 kickstart or whether or not it's that annual government contribution, used to be called the member tax credit. So the law basically says if you can't meet your minimum living expenses, then you may be able to access that money for these grounds. There are some other carve-outs that do allow for medical treatment, palliative care, modifying a home if you've got a disability or a dependent that requires certain changes to the accommodation that you're living in. But the one we find that we encounter the most is people who can't meet their minimum living expenses with whatever income that they are currently receiving. So the way that it works is that, again, there's a form. You do have to detail, if you're making an application, the reason why you're applying. So you make a statement, and it might be that you've had a change in employment circumstances. Your employer might have moved you to full-time, from full-time to part-time, but your expenses haven't changed at all. And once you've made that declaration and provided some evidence about your ongoing income and expenditure, detailed what sort of assets you have, liabilities, and sent that through to your provider, that then goes to the scheme's supervisor, so the one who makes sure that we're doing our job. And they make a final decision on whether or not your circumstances meet the requirements to facilitate a withdrawal. Now, when the supervisor assesses a withdrawal, they'll look at things like, is there a deficit in income versus expenditure? How long has there been a deficit, and how much can they pay out to help close that gap?
So on the financial hardship side, are you able to withdraw money from your KiwiSaver to pay off debt? Is that something else that you can use it for?
Generally not, no. So the supervisor, what they look at is they take a holistic view of your finances, your incomings and your outgoings, and then they may look to say cover part of that debt. They would look to cover the 13 weeks from the payment, of outstanding debt, but not to cover the whole debt. And it is a question we get quite often, but unfortunately not, as the legislation currently stands. It can't be used to clear debt. We do recommend clients search prior to looking to access their KiwiSaver alternative sources of income. And we are happy to help as well in terms of pointing them in that direction. The supervisor does sometimes look for evidence of that before making a decision.
Thanks for that, and thanks for answering all these KiwiSaver questions. And there's plenty more that I'm sure I could ask you, but we might have to save that for a future episode. I'm just wondering if you have any final tips for Kiwis that might be wanting to learn a bit more about the KiwiSaver or have some more questions in terms of what they can do and where they should go and things like that.
Yeah, I think this session's been timely, particularly for the KiwiSaver members who are in a default scheme coming up to the 1st of December. So I'd recommend to them, and there will be quite a few, just to check who they're with, and then make a decision from there. Look into the many different providers that are available. And generally speaking, you can join those online if you're wanting to. So certainly I'd recommend that for those people. And others as well can look into their KiwiSaver if they haven't for a while. The last time they might have checked was in receipt of an annual member statement. So just to have a look, make sure they're invested in the right fund for their circumstances, because it can make a big difference down the track.
Yeah, I'd say much the same. Make sure you're contributing, make sure you're maximising that annual government contribution, and make sure that you're on the right fund choice for someone like you. Lots of tools available, lots of resources available online. So it's just a matter of reaching out to gather a bit of information and making some decisions.
And if someone wanted some professional advice in terms of going to a financial advisor, is that something that that is quite easy to do?
Absolutely. There is a very, very wide selection of financial advisors available. A lot of KiwiSaver providers will be attached to businesses that do offer financial advice services. So if you ask your KiwiSaver provider, they might be able to point you in the direction of a suitable financial advisor. Otherwise, if you look for an investment advisory firm, there's a broad spectrum.
I think as well, I'd add that a lot of Kiwis think that financial advice is expensive. Many options for financial advice are actually complimentary, so it's worth mentioning that.
Worth looking into. Awesome. Thanks, Corey and Daniel, for chatting to me today. Really, really appreciate your time, and hopefully you've helped clear up some of the questions that are commonly asked about KiwiSaver. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Russ.